Yeah. Now, officially, we're at bang on 5 o'clock. So let me just get a few quick intros, as it were, and then I'll leave you and Chris to have a fantastic conversation as we all learn lots more, if that's okay with everyone. Just to very quick introduction, Chris, thanks very much for introducing Elisabet today. We were having a bit of a pre-discussion about the title, about how psychological safety can drive innovation, which I'm really intrigued to learn more about. So thanks for coming up with that one. That's really good. Now, next, what I'd be really grateful for those who've joined us today, if you could very kindly introduce yourself in the chat. By the way, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. If people could avoid putting in web links in there, it'd be really appreciated, because obviously it's about sharing value today. Also, if you've got comments, if you could ideally, if it's quite a long comment you're making, or an observation or a question, ideally if you could break it up into 2 parts, because it can be quite difficult to read and it obscures sometimes the person's part of the program. But yeah, that's fantastic if you could do that. And then, what you're really passionate about, how you'd like to make a difference. And if you've got a killer question, just ask those as you think of them. And I'm sure Elisabet or Chris will interject at different points and do their best to assist on those particular areas. So I've just lost my mouse again. In terms of a quick intro for myself, I'm the founder of Business Growth Bureau. Feel really passionately about what we're helping, supporting other business owners and leaders to grow their businesses. And I also believe on the importance of what I class as circular relationships, where everyone feels that everyone wins. So whether it's clients, prospects, partners, suppliers, your team or your staff, your associates, and so on. If you can make everyone feel good about that relationship, then what tends to happen is things come back in droves. I always find it pays to pay forward in a number of respects, and you end up with a very nice bunch of people that you end up by working with. Chris, a bit of an introduction from yourself. Love to hear a bit about.
Yeah. Thank you, Rupert. I'm passionate about helping leaders and business owners to elevate their own performance, develop their teams, build highly engaged workplaces. So that's something I love to do. And a little bit like you, Rupert, I love kind of networking and building relationships. I've had a radio show on Voice America called the Business Elevation Show. It's now in its 10th year. I think we're 389th hour tomorrow of interviews. So it's built an amazing network of people, which was where Liz has been on the show several times. And we actually met earlier than that, didn't we? But it's built a wonderful network of amazing people, some of them who you get to meet on these calls. And then I co-wrote a book called The Power to Get Things Done, whether you feel like it or not, which was a bit of therapy for me, really, because I needed to get a bit more of the right things done rather than the things I like doing. So that inspired that, and fortunately Random House picked up on that and published it. So that was great. So Elisabet,
I'm going to duck out at this point and leave you to. I'll be in the chat and I'll join you in the last 10 minutes. So over to you, Elisabet, and I'm sure Chris would love to introduce you.
Shall I say a few words about you? Because I think you told me earlier we met in 2008, so it was a little while ago, wasn't it?
I know.
We met on a speaking program. We'll maybe share a little bit about that, because it was certainly very memorable for me.
It was an experience, wasn't it?
Wasn't it? I never remember. I remember being the third person to introduce myself, and I was a bit nervous because I was speaking in public, and I remember one person saying, "Yeah, I'm a movie actor from Australia, and I've been in films with Richard Burton and people like that, and I came second in Europe in Toastmasters last year." And then the next person said, "I'm a twice world champion rower from Denmark, and I speak about 220 times a year." And then it was me, and I think you were somewhere. So,
I was already hiding under the table at that time, I'm sure.
But there were two great people still in my network, but it was fascinating. So we've known each other for 12 years, and the thing I know about you, you're a great person. You're from Sweden. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, and originally sort of Sami up in Lapland kind of connections. You're an international strategist, you're a speaker, you're a consultant, a coach, multi-award winning author. This is your latest book, and I believe now it's got 3 stars on it because it's won 3 awards. So
Yeah, it has.
pretty cool. You're the CEO of a company called Catapult, which is leadership and digital. And then you're co-founder of Think Solutions, and you're also on an advisory board as well. Which so what's the advisory board?
AI Forum. So it's about artificial intelligence, and it's like a multidisciplinary advisory board that's having input and being asked to sort of check in on various things as research is being done in AI, and really just reporting back on it and in how it works in where you are, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, I bet it is. Tell us a bit then. What was life up in the Northern Circle, Arctic Circle then? Because I've been up there. It was been pretty beautiful, pretty chilly. And were you one of those children in those beautiful costumes?
No, not really. Although obviously plenty of heavy coats. No, so I was born close to the Arctic Circle, but when I was quite little, my parents moved to Stockholm, so I grew up in Stockholm. But I spent loads of time up there. So have been in the dark, cold winters, but also the most amazing summers you can imagine that you get up there. Love it up there. But the winters are a little bit too heavy for me, which is why I live in Hove.
But you were telling me that you've been in minus 42 degrees up in the Arctic Circle, but you've actually found Hove colder. Why was that?
Yeah. When I first moved, I actually lived in Brighton originally. When I moved to Brighton first time around, I remember the first winter I had never been so cold, and I realized that it was because the houses, the buildings were not insulated in the kind of way that I was used to, and I lived right by the sea as well. So you would just have it, with single glass, and it would just blow straight through a 200-year-old building. And I was cold, and I was surprised. And there's a rawness to the cold, I think. So sometimes if you hear minus 42, that's actually in a much drier air climate. If you're at minus 42 in Hove, you wouldn't survive, I don't think, because there's a humidity and a rawness to the air that you don't get up there.
You got those nice little huts up in Lapland with a berry juice with a roaring fire in the middle of to huddle inside.
Yeah.
Or is that just me being a bit twee?
No, that's all right.
I took my children to see Father Christmas in Lapland. I'm not sure he was. They did twigged he wasn't the real one though, I think. But it was an amazing experience, actually. Beautiful.
In Finland, because I think Lapland in the UK is typically Finnish Lapland.
Yeah.
So Lapland goes across Norway, Sweden, Finland, and parts of Russia. So sort of Lapland is goes over several countries.
Yeah, it's beautiful part of the world. So what brought you to Brighton?
I used to work for American Express in Stockholm, and I was offered a job when a new European head office was put together back in 1995, a long time ago. And the European head office was in Brighton, so that's how I ended up here. And then I met my husband to be here because he's a local boy. And after having lived in Sweden a number of years, we moved back about 5 years ago.
So I think my wife would love to live in Stockholm. It's one of our favourite cities in Europe, actually.
It's beautiful.
It's a gorgeous place. It's going to be absolutely lovely. So we're going to talk about psychological safety today. This subject really kind of intrigued me, and particularly having had a number of clients over the last few months, which and a lot of conversations, realizing that there's an awful lot going on for people right now with kind of COVID. But tell us, what is psychological safety, and why is it a subject that you deem as being something to really give attention to? Because I've not heard people talk about it in that way before. But so what is it?
So when you are psychologically safe, you are fearless in a way. So the opposite to that would be fearful. So imagine a workplace that is fearful. That's when people don't dare speak up. They don't dare to speak their mind. They don't dare share ideas. They don't dare make or try something out or make mistakes because they feel there's risk involved. They feel that if I do that, I might get slapped down, I might be demoted, or I may not be promoted next time round. So there's a sort of a feeling that this is not a safe place to really be myself and contribute in the way that I could potentially do.
Right.
Uh,
So this therefore it's about you feel that kind of tension in organisations sometimes, don't you?
yeah.
Which is kind of in the air. I remember it in some of the organisations I worked with, and certain people's desks you didn't feel so comfortable walking there, and or people that you didn't feel so comfortable being in a room with, and people that you could be open with, and some you couldn't. Is that what you're?
And I'm sure a lot of people experience that. So just take something like the idea of shooting the messenger. You know, if something's gone wrong and someone's thinking, I really need to tell the boss about this, or I need to tell someone, but they're thinking, I'm going to get shot down if I say it. So sometimes people try to sort of go under the radar and think, maybe if I don't mention it, someone else will, and then they will be the ones that are in trouble. I think it's not necessarily even intentional that someone intends to create a psychologically unsafe environment. Sometimes people are under pressure and they react and respond in a certain way that sort of still creates that.
Yes.
But I think the important thing here is that it happens typically in a particular environment. So what I mean by that is it's not an individual thing to feel psychologically safe or unsafe. It's the environment we're in that creates a feeling of being safe or unsafe. So therefore, typically, I would say it will be within a team. So I work a lot with teams, for example, and the idea is, how do you create a really great team? Well, a great team is people who, have a shared purpose together. They have something they want to achieve together, but they also have an environment or a culture where they feel they can all contribute, where they can give each other feedback, where they dare to try things out. And I think it's true to say as well that it's so important, particularly today. Change happens so fast today. If we don't have people that dare speak up and share ideas and try things out, then we're not going to get anywhere. The world is so disruptive, and there's always someone else, a competitor maybe, will disrupt by the way they're able to innovate, and we don't want to fall behind. So I think this is something that organizations, companies need to think about, but it's particularly important sort of team per team. So the company may stand for something, but it can be one team where people feel very psychologically safe, and there can be another team where people feel psychologically unsafe because of the culture and the sort of how that team works.
I completely agree with that. I remember in my past having sort of bosses and directors who, when the regime changed, the safety shifted. So I remember one telling me early on about sharing something I thought was important with him, and he gave me a little discussion and drew the organisation chart and showed that I was down here and he was up there. And then I had another situation with when I was a bit more senior, but a director in a big company was brought in from another organisation. The old one who I got on with very well had been pushed out. And I went and shared something very important with him, and he did take action. But again, he said I should speak to my boss and should have spoken to my boss. But I also knew my boss was scared to give him the message, so I gave it to him direct. And anyway, I left a few months later because I thought, actually, I don't want to be here with that kind of culture, because actually I'm doing right. So this is something that I guess culturally organizations have got to learn about, is it? And also individual leaders?
Yeah, I think it's both, because I think as a company you set the sort of baseline for how do we do things here? What are we all about? So if you think about a company has a vision and a mission, they have values. And typically I would say more and more, the kind of values that organizations need to have these days are very much things like psychological safety. Yeah. And that's why I keep bringing in innovation in this, and which is why it's in the title as well. And this whole idea that you have to keep innovating, you have to keep coming up with new solutions in a fast changing world. And that can never happen unless you have a very open and safe environment where people can bandy ideas around, and where they can say, well, actually, let's try this. Because if you look at a team, you have so much clever ideas in a team. You know, people see different things, they have different experiences. And if you can really bring that out, then you can start to really fire off all sorts of creative ideas and create more innovation. And that most people these days have some kind of knowledge jobs, they're often called. This whole idea that it's not just automatic, things happen the same way the whole time. More and more we need to collaborate. I think I saw a study recently in Harvard Business Review where they were saying that actually we are collaborating 50% more than we did 20 years ago, which means there are more people we need to interact with. There are more people we need to depend on. There are more people we need to listen to in order to get the results that we need. And therefore, that environment with all the people working together, which of course doesn't just need to be in a team, it can be with other stakeholders as well. You know, what's the environment like there? So that we can come up with the new ideas that we need to meet the challenges of now and of the future.
Yeah, so this is great. Can you put Charlotte's comment up, Rupert? Because I think that's, I completely agree with Charlotte. You know, I've worked in a couple of organisations that talk about an inclusive approach, that value people, stand up for their rights, but don't afford the same principles, the way they manage and treat staff members. And I think this is a bit like, kind of, see it corporate social responsibility, putting it in the business annual report each year. Oh yeah, we're really responsible, but not following it through, isn't it?
And you know what? And thanks, Charlotte, for that comment. I think that's really helpful, and I think it's very common. Sadly, I think it is very common, and I think it often comes down to the whole idea that we sort of intellectually get the idea of how important it is to have an environment where people can collaborate in this kind of way. But we don't always understand what it is that then creates the experience, whether that be an experience of safety or unsafety. So what I see is people don't always understand their own impact in how they respond to something. So say that someone comes with an idea and say, oh yeah, why don't we do this? And at that time, that may feel threatening to the leader or someone else for whatever reason. And they may go, no, actually, we can't do that. And then even that may make the person think, well, actually, they said they wanted to hear, but they didn't really want to hear. So maybe next time around, I'm not going to try. So sometimes it can be quite little things that starts to shape an unsafe environment. And it's not always that leaders and other influencers within the team realize that.
Yeah, so do we need to sort of eradicate, we need to remove all fear and just bring in a more caring, open approach?
Yeah, to some degree, but I think it's also a question of recognizing that not everyone knows everything. I think we often feel like we have to have all the answers, and often leaders do. But I think we want to be right in some kind of way. If you see the opposite of being right as being wrong, no one wants to be wrong, right?
Yeah. But
it's that sometimes make people fearful as well. And so I think another really important part of this is to encourage a growth mindset. And of course, that's a concept that's been talked about a lot over the last sort of 10 years or so by Carol Dweck, who coined the term growth mindset. But it's this whole idea that we believe that we have so much capacity. If we have a growth mindset, we're not fearful to take on things we don't know from before. We're not fearful to try new things out. So it's actually talking about having a growth mindset, really, having that as part of the ethos of a team. I mean, I have twin boys, they're going to be 18 next month. Crazy to think, but they are. And they've had a lot of that in the great school and college that they now go in, where the school talks a lot about growth mindset. This whole idea that you're not static as a person, you have endless capacity to learn. So don't be fearful, try it out. So, we're not victims to psychological safety or unsafety, if you know what I mean. It's not just a leader's job. We can also do a lot ourselves to think about believing in ourselves and the fact that we can continuously grow and we don't have to be right. No one has all the answers, and particularly as the world is moving so fast and change is so fast.
I'm just sort of thinking now about sort of meetings with sometimes a meeting can be better with a boss in, and sometimes it's better without. And is that linked to how much psychological safety people feel in that room?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that in itself gives you a feel. If people feel safer to talk when the boss isn't there, then there isn't complete psychological safety, I would say.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, be fearful.
So is there more office politics where there's less psychological safety?
Yeah, I would say so. Because with psychological safety comes transparency. I don't think you can feel truly safe if you don't feel like there is transparency and you can talk about anything. I think it's obviously a question of how you say things. So I think sometimes when people have something they're not happy with, sometimes the way it gets said sounds like a complaint rather than a wish maybe to make something better. So obviously there's some of that we ourselves can take responsibility for.
And do we, going back to my point, and there'll be people here listening in on this who work with companies and can spot that, or they've got their own companies and they maybe thinking right now about how psychologically safe do they make their employees or their clients feel when they speak to them, etc. But I also wonder right now whether there's also this is an era where actually people don't feel psychologically very safe. A lot of people are worrying about their jobs, whether they're going to have jobs into the longer term, whether there maybe I've met a number of people who are having challenges around relationships during lockdown, which have proved very difficult, and there's a lot going on for a lot of people who've lost people due to COVID, and that makes us all a bit more fragile, doesn't it? Do we need to be mindful of that?
Yeah, and I think that is so true, because I think there is a lot of fear and for a number of reasons at the moment. And therefore, it might not feel like the right time to sort of stick your neck out and speak up about things. But I think with the awareness of how important it is, there can be ways of sort of maybe starting to open the door for this. Because I think it's also, even if you look at all the challenges that people are facing as part of the pandemic, as organizations are facing, as teams are facing, the need for collaboration is greater than ever. And it's not so easy to collaborate if we don't feel safe. So actually, if you can break down the barriers for psychological unsafety into safety, then you can have people discuss more maybe and come up with ideas for how do we solve this and how can we do this differently. And I think interestingly, I saw a lot of that back in the spring in particular, because when the pandemic first hit and we went into a lockdown, there was a lot of people rallying together to sort of solve the crisis. But we often depend on a crisis to sort of make that happen, and then we sort of go back to normal again. So what I'm saying is that this is something we can, and I would recommend keep doing all the time, to keep saying, how can I break down these barriers and really have people come and bring to the table what they've got. I've got all these amazing people here, and they will all have seen and heard and understood different things. And we need to hear that.
Yeah. Charlotte's raised a really good point, because it's one very topical for me right now, because I'm just contemplating something similar. She's come across same thing in training, where do you have senior staff in those trainings? Because actually we know that these sorts of behaviors come top down, so it's good to often have senior people in, because they will learn something through a training as well. But it can restrict the safety that the delegates feel. How do you approach that?
I mean, sometimes you maybe need to separate people out. But the way I would approach it and have approached it at time is that to also give coaching support to the senior leaders as part of that.
Yeah.
So to really help the leaders understand what impact am I having here before, but also throughout and afterwards. Because it does come back to that, helping leaders to hold up a mirror and see this is actually what people are seeing and experiencing. And often leaders don't intend necessarily to make people feel unsafe. But sometimes sometimes it can be how the goals have been constructed for a team that makes that a reality, or whatever it is. sometimes the awareness just isn't there. So I think there's a lot of support that can be done to leaders to help overcome that.
Yeah. And I suppose also how open the leaders are prepared to be. I'm just going back to a program run many years ago where the client insisted that we had a little section on there which was start, stop, and continue. For I did a big about 100 people through different programs, and the board asked me if I would do a session with them because they wanted to know what on earth had happened to their people because they were all happy. And so the CEO called me in and said, "What on earth have you done to my people?" And then I did a 2.5 day program for them. But they insisted that I also did a sort of start, stop, continue, and got feedback from all the staff on each of the individuals on the board. And one overnight, I needed to feed that information back, and then they would share it openly. But some of that feedback was so harsh that there was great discomfort within the board to share some of that information, and it really got me. I wasn't sure about the idea, but I allowed it to go ahead, and I'm still not sure, even 12 years on, whether it was the right thing to do.
I have to say, I remember I was, very long time ago, I was trained to teach people to give feedback. So give and receive feedback in an effective way. And I think feedback can be an amazing thing, but most of the time it's how we do it and in what order we say things that makes all the difference. So there are some really good structures to do it that helps make the person listen to what you're saying rather than try to sort of fight it, if you like, because it's not emotional and it's not personal. It's actually describing more of what am I seeing here, what's the effect of that, and what happens as a result of that, and therefore what would I like to see. So I think the structure of the feedback makes all the difference, but we can't assume that we can just do that from
No. So I did a program for an investment bank last year on it. So it was a helpful to think about that, because it is a gift getting feedback. But then when you have some feedback on somebody in writing, like one of the worst bosses I've ever worked for, it's hard to sugarcoat it. But anyway, we'll move on from that. So what happens if we don't talk about this?
Well, if we don't talk about this, you'll end up with a lot of individual contributors. And if you have individual contributors who are just doing their thing and not necessarily speaking up and collaborating the way they can, then I think it's very easy to not have the kind of development that you need to have as an organization. And this, of course, is where innovation comes in. So the reason why I link this to innovation is that we have to innovate more than we ever have. I sort of call it, you either disrupt or you get disrupted. That's the reality in a lot of industries. So, and in order to disrupt or to do something different, to deliver new solutions, you need to come up with new creative ideas, new solutions. And in order to do that, you need everyone's input. Creativity and innovation is rarely a eureka moment. Typically, it's when people come together. And so I facilitate conversations in teams where people start at one end talking about something, and then someone says, well, actually, and I've seen and heard this, and what about this? And all of a sudden you have this sort of cross-pollination of ideas that can really start to bring out something very valuable. And of course, because you have a number of people doing it together, you're also covering a lot of ground, as in you're looking at it from a number of different angles. So from early on in the process, you've actually to some degree stress tested some of the ideas, so you can more quickly move along to take the creative ideas into an innovation.
And the techniques that you use to get people into the right kind of zone to do that, where they feel safe in positioning it. So
yeah. And I mean, I think obviously there's a lot you can do to bring out innovation in people, as in you have to sort of play it out. So I have some fun exercises to sometimes do with people where they have to look at, for example, something silly, like an exercise like, so what's the similarity between a king and a bus driver, right? And they just have to try to find something. So it'd be like, oh yeah, maybe and you start to just sort of tease out creativity in that kind of way. You sort of play with it. But in itself, that of course isn't enough. So I think one of the most important things you need to do as a team is you really need to think about what kind of team culture do we want to have as a team, to sit down as a team and talk about that. As a leader, to think about every time I go and I talk to my team, I meet with my team, how am I going to show up? What am I going to show them? Who am I going to be? Not just what am I going to talk about? What's our agenda? Who am I going to be? What are they going to experience when I come into the room? Maybe sometime in the future when people are together again, or when I show up online. What are they seeing? What are they experiencing from me? Because it's that makes the biggest difference. And also, therefore, be very, very present. So come in and be completely present. Really listen. Thanking people for coming up with ideas, taking genuine interest, and also just checking in how people are doing. How are things going and how are you feeling? And at this time, what are some of the challenges you have? So to really open up the conversations and being a role model for that, and really showing as well that actually I've tried things and it didn't go well, and that's okay because I learned from this. It's all of these kind of things that needs to be talked about as a team, but also very much role modeled.
And do you? I find it helpful in these sorts of meetings to have a sort of session. I call it ORS. So it's what's the outcome, and some people need agenda, but then there's rules in there, but the rules include having fun, but there also gives you an opportunity then to say, actually, the rules are, we're just going to be completely and utterly open with each other.
Yeah.
No idea is a silly idea. We're just going to get it down, and it sort of gives permission then, doesn't it, to be able to free think.
Yeah, I know. I agree, and I would say I think it's great to have a team, create like a team charter for a team. With a team charter, of course, you map out everything from what's our shared purpose, who's doing what, roles and responsibilities, and all of those kind of more technical, practical things. But one of the most important pieces is the one, and how are we going to be together? And there comes all of this, right? We are going to be honest with one another. We're always going to assume positive intent as well, because sometimes, conflict happens in teams when people are of different opinions. But then it's a question of saying, well, actually, if we start off always assuming that other people mean well, what difference is that going to make?
Yeah.
What if we as a team start thinking about each other as customers? How would we be with customers? So it's little things like that can be really cool conversations for teams.
Yeah. Make sure we're not expecting a war.
Yeah, exactly. We tend to get what we expect.
Yeah.
So if we've had a bad experience last time around with someone and we go into a meeting again, we tend to sort of look out for that. It's almost like we have the antenna out that's picking up what we expect from before.
It's a brilliant topic, this, actually, to bring out and talk with leaders as part of their development, isn't it? That's creating that safety.
How can you create that? Because everyone needs it.
I think it got me thinking back to my days when I was in a sales, sort of a business development manager in Mars, and I remember that was probably one of the best teams I've ever worked with. In that the boss created a guy called Alan Ravey, who's not with us anymore, sadly, but he created a little culture in that team, which was just of humour and fun and support and love, and we all just wanted to be together at weekends. We would socialise and we would get together, and all of us, because he created an environment such that there's no one else we'd rather have been with, which was amazing.
Which is so cool. And of course, you remember those, that team, that leader. But what I'd like to add to that, actually, as you were saying there, I think one of the really important things to create psychological safety as well is to give everyone equal opportunity to speak. Because sometimes one of the challenges in teams is that some people speak more and some people speak less.
Yeah.
And you need to facilitate that. You need to invite people in and ensure that actually you're listening to everyone. It's a really interesting study. I studied a short course at MIT a couple of years ago in AI and business strategy. And there was some research we looked at there where they were looking at what is intelligence and what is clever organizations and intelligent teams they'd done a study where they said, okay, so can we just look at sort of IQ and people we know are intelligent, and what does that mean? And if we just put a lot of intelligent people together, does that create more intelligence? And they found that wasn't the case. They actually found the two most important factors to create a clever team and a clever organization is to have people be perceptive, as in not just focusing on their own, but being able to pick up what's going on around them, to maybe see what's going on with other people. That was a really important factor. And the other factor was the equal participation, where there wasn't just a few people that sort of hogged all the time, but they heard from everyone. And they found with those two things in place, there were much more conversation going on, and they could multiply the intelligence of the organization or the team and the organization as a result of that, which I think actually links very nicely into this.
Can you just
innovation?
Yeah, there's sort of metrics to measure all sorts of things, but can you measure this?
Yes, you can. And there's actually a lot of really interesting stuff out there about this. There's obviously a number of questions that organizations use to check in with people if they feel psychologically safe or not. But there's also a number of measurements in place that can show that organizations that have and teams that have psychological safety, they perform better. Higher performance on all sorts of levels. There's more innovation, there's better financial return. So there are a number of hard results that come as a result of this.
Yeah, it's really good. So Renato's made a point from his colleagues in Dubai. I think he pointed out people have biases already in place, and we've got to work through some of those.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really important point as well. How can you sort of remove some of that and observe when there are biases there?
Yeah, because it
but again, I think you almost need to come in with a clean slate. So come in with assume positive intent from everyone, and say, actually, I'm going to go into this meeting and I'm going to be really excited about being here with all these amazing people. Because if I look at other people as amazing people, then I'm more likely to look out for, I'm curious to find out what I'm going to learn here today. So I have one of my favorite questions. I love questions, as in just sort of throwing questions in here and there. But it's the question, what did you learn today? Because we learn something every day, but sometimes we miss it. And if we're really curious in every single meeting we go into and we listen with intent, we learn so much. And we learn from people we didn't know we were going to learn from. So, but we need to go in with our intention.
And that's a really good question at the end of a session, isn't it? To go around the room and ask, what did people learn from this today, and I always find that at the end of a program, just to go around everybody, you might feel that a meeting actually hasn't been maybe as productive as you wanted to be, but you ask that question and suddenly the room erupts, isn't it, with all sorts of ideas and thoughts, and it leaves the meeting on a real high, because you suddenly, that's the way, that sort of a question is a way to discover the value that's been.
Absolutely.
But if you don't ask it,
no. You need to ask, what did you learn? You can't say, did you learn something?
Yeah, what did you learn?
You could then say no. But when you say what, you also automatically go into your head, you say, so what did I learn today? And that makes you reflect. And sometimes you need to stop and think about it and actually observe that it was a learning. Otherwise, you might even miss it. Yeah. I don't know how many people I've seen at the end of the year when they're doing some kind of annual appraisal, and they have to think about, what did I do all year? Right now I'm trying to summarize it. And unless you've stopped at regular intervals and reflected and used that learning, a lot of it goes missing.
Yeah, this annual appraisal is not always the best thing, though, is it?
A lot of organizations have stopped them.
Yeah, haven't they?
And actually, I think I'm in favor of regular conversations instead.
Yeah.
So if you have a really good communicative team setting, then you have these conversations all the time anyway. You do it as a team and you do it sort of one-on-one. And then the annual appraisals aren't needed in that way.
So what do you do without them?
Yeah, you can do without.
Would you so no documentation? Just
you do some kind of documentation along the way, but the idea is that you continuously give feedback so that there is a continuous growth through the year, rather than just having these check-in points. And by doing so, of course, you're going to document some of those conversations for sure. But it just becomes a summary rather than a, now we're at the end of the year and we're going to review the whole year. That's been a gradual thing. It's been a sort of a two-way communication all the way through. That tends to be more effective in my mind.
Yeah. I understood something that's just come to me. Can you create safety in an organization such that, for example, if you had a board which was maybe more male dominated and you wanted diversity, such that if you had a topic that was important, you could bring other people in, so to ensure that you had a very diverse group of people to talk about that topic, rather than just being a board topic or whatever. Can you create the safety that enables that kind of thing to happen, so people can be called in and also not be nervous because they're sitting with the chief executive? Or have you come across organizations like that?
I think the invitation needs to be framed in such a way that people understand that. I think it's a question of explaining and linking it in some kind of way. Where, so if the board really wanted to invite all these people in to get a diverse point of view, then it needs to be presented as to why do we want that? What's that going to lead to? How are we going to use that? So that can create a sense of that there's real authentic wish to hear this, right? And then I think it's also a question of, it might also be great to do a little bit of coaching for those who are going to go in and share, how do you best present an idea or an opinion? I have one of my worst experiences in my career, no, not quite, but I had feedback from my boss. I was a very young manager at American Express many years ago, and I posed some very critical questions to the president of Europe for American Express, who'd come to Stockholm to talk about the next 5 years or something, because I thought some of the things he talked about didn't make sense. But I didn't get any good response from him. He sort of just, pushed it away a bit. And then afterwards, my manager said to me, she said, you had some really good ideas in there, but the way you said it made you sound very whiny. And because you did, I take it on. And she said, I think that's such a shame because you have good ideas. And I was horrified. But then afterwards, when it sank in, I thought, goodness me, she could have never told me that and I wouldn't have known. And it was such a huge, huge gift. Yeah. So I think it is a question of also recognizing that we don't always know how we put things out there and that we can be heard better if we think a little bit about it.
Yeah. I learned an interesting stat that in one particular research study where into feedback, and 90% of managers and leaders questioned believed they were in the top 10% when it came to giving feedback.
Yeah. That may not be the case.
They can't all be in the top 10%, can they?
Feedback is tricky. Feedback is tricky.
And being able to receive it as well.
Yeah.
Well, because that's a gift, isn't it? Really, but you've got to have an environment that makes you feel safe to receive it.
Exactly.
And give it to your peers and the like. So any other kind of final points that we need to talk about, or any key sort of takeaways, do you think, from this conversation? That
I think one of the things I find a little interesting at the moment, because a lot of people just work with each other online, and often psychological safety is sort of linked to trust to some degree, but trust tends to be more sort of one-on-one. We can trust one person and not another, and psychological safety is more about a group setting. But it's less easy to create the same kind of level of trust when you don't meet face to face. So I think there's a little bit of a barrier that we're currently experiencing because we're not meeting each other the way that we used to. And it's worth keeping that in mind. So I think there's a lot that we can do to try to recreate more of the sort of the personal connection. And sometimes it's sort of a one-on-one call will be a good way of doing it, but we still haven't got the same kind of eye contact that we have in real life. And it's worth keeping that in mind.
Yeah. Well, I want to say so thank you, because it's been perfect timing to have this conversation. I've never thought of this. I absolutely get it, but I've never actually thought of it as a topic. So I think as Pradeep says there, it's a really good topic, this, and the timing is right.
Yeah. So we got a question here from.
We talked about this, didn't we, this morning?
Yeah. So Freddie's question is, thank you, Elisabet, for sharing a crucial topic that needs developing in the current climate. However, I would be interested in your view of the current political leadership style across the seas on the North. Yes, so we did talk about not getting political. I think when it comes to politics or business or anything else, I think we need to listen to other people. We need to be able to hear other points of view, because if we don't, we're in an echo chamber and we will be surrounded by nothing but yes sayers, and no one can survive on their own ideas alone. And so I think there's a lot to be considered for leaders in all sorts of places and organizations and governments, to really think, how can I create an environment where I listen to others so that we together can create something. And I think there are some challenges on that point across the sea. Yes.
Yeah, very, 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 very tactfully put. So what you're saying is that many politicians don't listen.
Yeah, I think it's probably because there's some fearfulness involved.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So I'm gonna add Rupert in now. So Rupert, do you want to join us as well? I had to stream. Oh, I've lost myself. Now, shall I put myself back in again? I've lost my picture.
Right. So put yourself in, Chris.
I don't know where my picture's gone, but maybe I'm
like dots here. So can I enable you if you can enable yourself? Hang on a minute. I can't actually, or can I?
There you are.
Yeah, that's better.
I went off
the radio, so that's
Yeah, Pradeep really surprised me there, actually, because Pradeep is normally not controversial at all, but he came in straight with a kind of question there, so I thought that was really good. But Elisabet, thanks ever so much for your very kind sharing of value there, which I think is very much appreciated by all. I'll just give a quick summary of a few things as part of a roundup. We might have a very quick wrap up at the end. If everything goes well, so just bear me a second. I'll bring this up. There we go. So obviously, these are all the great points that have been discussed today, and thanks very much for that. Just a quick reminder for those of you who are not regulars on today's live stream. Basically, when you book what we class as a flexi ticket, it enables you to attend either the networking or collaboration or live stream or both. Obviously, I noticed a number of you have actually come straight from one into the other, which is fantastic, and thanks very much for joining us today. Next week, we got a lovely lady came on board. I think Chris and I are just a tiny bit worried, though, because she's having such a good time. We've not been able to reach her, I think, Chris. Is that right?
You're sorry?
Kathy O'Dowd has been having such a wonderful time.
Kathy's always adventuring, so she's lives in the Pyrenees in Andorra, but she's currently, I noticed on her Facebook, she's canyoning and she's climbing mountains and walking, doing what Kathy does in any spare time that she's got. So she's a little bit out of contact this week, but we pulled this together for next week. I'm sure she's such a professional. I'm sure she'll be with us next Thursday. And we're going to talk about thinking like an explorer. So Kathy was the first female to, I think she was the first South African female, but also the first female to climb Mount Everest from both sides. But actually now Kathy has done that many adventures. She would see, Everest as being, probably the wealthy white middle-aged male's got a midlife crisis. So there's that many people climb it now. But what Kathy has done in looking for, real challenging adventure is her and a team did try and climb, I think it's Nanga Parbat in the Himalayas in Pakistan, which is unclimbed. In fact, 22% of the people who had tried it in the past had died. So we're going to be drawing upon next week the experiences and the lessons of dealing with uncertainty and kind of planning projects and pioneering and the decisions and the pressures that explorers make under extreme conditions. And we're going to be thinking about that and relating it to our businesses and to the world right now. So she's a fascinating lady, speaks on huge stages, 44 countries she's spoken in. So I think we're a real privilege, like Elisabet, to have Kathy next week.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to that one as well, and especially as I haven't got any sense of a head for heights at all. So And Chris, you went on a little mini adventure you were telling me this morning, weren't you? Got up to about 19,000 feet up a particular mountain range some years ago, which I hadn't fully appreciated, but seriously impressed by that. So
I've done the Inca Trail, and I've been on the top of Mount Shackletire in Bolivia, which I think is one of the biggest mountains in Bolivia. Which every step, we're talking about 3,000 meters lower than the top of Everest, so it's not. It's nothing like climbing an Everest, or I think at Nanga Parbat, that's about 8,000 meters. It's nothing. Was nothing like that. But what I did observe was just the pain of taking every step and being completely out of breath, which you've got to really experience that to know what it's like. So I'm in awe of people who will go another 2,000-3,000 meters above that. Crikey!
Yeah. No, great. So good on you, as it were. Just a quick reminder for those of you who are with us today as well that we've got the 3-day mini conference coming up, not next Monday, but the week after. So it's Monday the 21st. Each day has got one 90-minute session. Very welcome to join us for that. And there is going to be one prize winner over the 3 days who's going to win this. Stuart Honey won it previously, so it's all fair game. So do feel you can join in. And in terms of registering for the live streams and for the mini conference, broadly speaking, you go to the events drop down the Business Growth Bureau website. You choose the first option, which is this one in black here. You've got an option to choose recurring, which case you can book multiple weeks. If it's for the mini conference, because it's a pre-programmed 3-day mini conference, you can actually just book once. It books you for all 3 days. If you can't make one of the days, they are recorded as well, so you do have access to those. But what I would say, a little clue if you wanted to enter the competition, if you can't make one of the days, do watch the recording you've missed, because that will stand you in good stead for the prize, which will be drawn on the Wednesday, all being well. So, and then a quick roundup, as it were. I very much appreciate you being with us here today. And we're here with you on the journey, however lonely it actually gets. And we want people to feel part of the growth of the organisation and part of the community. So by all means, set a reminder on Facebook. If you like what you've heard and what Elisabet's got to share today, do feel free to like and share the feed. And also, if it's on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and ring that bell, as our American friends would say, if you feel you've enjoyed it. So moving on a little bit from there in terms of contact details, Elisabet's details there, so it's Chris and so is mine. And also you've got Elisabet's mobile there and email address and web address. So thank you very much for what you shared with us today. It's been really appreciated. Elisabet, and we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left, so I can see that Renato has, Pradeep has asked, given a quick bit of feedback on something about his climb up the Himalayas. Yeah, I can really understand that. Elisabet, have you got any sort of, we talked about this a little bit before, and I think you actually did go into a bit of detail around this, but interestingly enough, a bit of a question I've got for you, if you don't mind, is I'm still noticing now it's a lot better than it was, but obviously when COVID came along in March, a lot of people really went into themselves. We noticed that amongst the coaching, training, consulting community, especially, not surprisingly so, because a lot of their clients were cancelling pieces of work. And obviously, I think a lot of people are now saying it's starting to come back again now, which is good. However, there is also a bit of a tendency to go back to perceived safety. And I use the word perceived very, emphasize that word perceived, because people's perception of perceived can be going back into themselves around actually looking outwards. Your title for this was absolutely great, because it actually played a lot on that. For those people who are perhaps a little bit suffer with a bit of overwhelm with what's really going on, what tips would you give to those people so that it really encourages to come out of themselves and really seize the moment and seize the entrepreneurial mindset tying in with the topic of today's conversation?
I think there's probably two things I would say. That the first one is to look at it as an opportunity for innovation. So think about, what has changed as a result of this? What are there different needs out there that I maybe haven't thought about? Is there something else that I can offer? Look at it as an opportunity to reinvent yourself, but maybe add something extra, or a different type of service. But I think often to do that, I say also connect with other people, because again, I think innovation and energy and often inspiration often happens with other people. So who are the people you can connect with? What's your network like? What are some old colleagues, or maybe some competitors, or who knows? Be a bit bold about it. Really reach out to people. And if you're seeing someone you're thinking, oh, I'd like to pick that person's brain, reach out to them, right? I think it's easy to become a little bit withdrawn when you're working from home. I've found that, and I miss being out there as much as I used to be. And I think we sometimes just need to give ourselves that little kick and say, get going, reach out, do something. So I think we need that network of people around us to really support one another and give each other ideas and boost each other in that way.
No, lovely. Okay, thank you. And Chris, what are your thoughts around that point?
Well, I think the word that's coming into my mind is kindness as well is important right now, and checking in with people, caring for people, finding out what's really going on underneath. They come into the workplace and with all sorts of challenges and issues that I've had a few people, and somebody said to me a few weeks ago, said, there's nobody actually has appreciated what's really going on with me like you have done. And I think if some of those things are happening to people and maybe line managers aren't aware of them, you might think that the performance is poor, but actually if they're worried sick because their mother's got cancer and they've got to come into the office, that's maybe a fair reason for them maybe not being out of sorts and not contributing in the same way, or their relationship is on the rocks because they've been squashed together in a 2-bedroom flat with 2 kids, and little challenges that they had between themselves suddenly being in lockdown, that a gulf's appeared. There's a lot going on for a lot of people, which I think we've got to somehow provide support networks for as well at this time. It's unprecedented, really.
Yeah. And it makes such a difference, I think. So when you're saying that, kind of checking in with people and seeing how people are, and there's something about actually expressing that's very powerful, because even by expressing it, you share it with someone, and you're able to look at it and say, okay, now what do I do? So it actually does quite a lot to us, just even having someone ask and then to express how we feel.
Yeah.
It does.
I find one of the most powerful things as well is to actually say a lot about how much you really appreciate someone. So going back to this thing which I joked about earlier on this morning about this hygienist I went to see first thing, but she clearly was quite fed up over the whole scenario at the moment. And I thought, in effect, I felt like giving her almost like a virtual hug. Obviously, you couldn't, but she just needed to feel really good about herself and the environment, and the fact that she was, or is a key worker in effect, and still continuing to do what she does, deserves a lot of recognition. If I take the view, and I think Chris, you're like this as well. I'm sure you are as well, Elisabet. If we can all do that, it just makes the world go around much more pleasantly, doesn't it? And makes us all want to get up and out of bed tomorrow. Thank you very much.
But it's the whole idea of making a difference. I mean, talk about making a difference. And I think if we think about it, we can make a difference every day. And really notice that and saying, who can I be kind to? Who can I reach out to? Absolutely. I love it.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much. Chris, anything closing comments? Elisabet, closing comments?
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Really, really great. And I've probably got thank you. And actually so topical, it's almost serendipity that I was just thinking about this in relation to an organization, as we spoke. To be able to talk about this today has been absolutely brilliant. I'd like to just say a couple of things, if you don't mind, which is that tomorrow on my Business Elevation show, I've got a guy called Stephen Gould who's a leader, runs a company called Everard's Brewery, and they've created something called Everard's Meadows, where 70 acres of land is being put out, is being utilised for the benefit of the local community that was private before, and for biodiversity. And he was identified as one of the top 50 leading lights in kindness and leadership. So it's an amazing story, and they're continuing this in a time where others are stopping investment, they're recruiting, but it's got an amazing attitude to it. So it'll be really well worth listening to that. And then the other thing I just said, people like Pradeep and Renato and etc. We've got some amazing guests like Elisabet, and we've got Cathay next week. So please do share these with people, and do invite people along, because we're bringing you absolutely top people who you'd spend a fortune to be able to see at an event. And we're bringing them along and giving you the opportunity to ask them questions and be part of it. So, just really, really appreciate your support and just letting people know about this, because we're doing this because we're just trying to help at the moment. It's our way of doing it, not getting paid for doing this. It's we're doing it to help. And so, but in helping, just a big thank you to Elisabet for doing that. So I want to acknowledge you for that, and I want to acknowledge you, Rupert, as well, because you put a huge amount of effort into this, and in sharing these and putting these on, and you're doing it. You're doing it. None of us are being paid. You're doing it for good things. It makes good business sense, but also just because you've got kind hearts. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you very much. Anyway, we'll give each other a virtual hug anyway. So, and thank you very much today for joining us. We'll see you next week at the usual time, and we've got a lot of guests lined up for you over the next 2 months. Chris and I have been working a list very hard, and we've got some great speakers coming up. Elisabet, thank you very much indeed. Well.
That's brilliant.
Take care, everyone. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.